Thanks. Our next speaker is Andy Slater. He's the commercial director at FACT360. He held a number of roles building out sales organizations, and he did that in both the UK and EMEA. Most recently, he was the VP and MD EMEA at Google.
At Actifio, who got bought by Google.
Got it. Okay. And he built out the revenue model there. So, Andy, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. So this is probably a little bit self-indulgent on the basis we sponsored it, so we thought we'd do a product pitch. But I'll try and make it less product orientated and talk about kind of how people are using this platform today and some of the benefits of it. Okay. I think the key thing is Jeff mentioned very briefly about technology-assisted review and using AI, etc. Okay, so this is very much around using artificial. We call it intuition. Okay, it's kind of the next level of artificial intelligence to be used in this space. And the key benefit of using it is that the idea is it identifies anomalies in digital communication. Okay, so if you think of everything you just heard in the last two presentations, a lot of the supporting evidence that will be related to any given investigation, today is about fraud and corruption, but it can be anything, is related to how people communicate with each other digitally. Okay, and that can be through the corporate email system, it can be short message, it can be through Google chat rooms, and I've got some examples where we've done some work in some financial institutions where it's been around Bloomberg chat rooms, for example. But the key here is this is all about unsupervised learning. So if you think about this whole world of e-discovery and the place that exists there, so you've got a relativity, you've got a Nuix, you've got an open text, you've got BrainSpace, you've got all the tools that investigative teams use, particularly the forensic teams. All of those require significant resources. Okay, they need a team of people to come and deploy the product, then train on how to use the product. And it takes a long time. This project was really started, it's just a bit of history, it started in 2017, as with most AI, it's kind of born out of a university project. And then we took the whole project, the team, the development, everything, and it turned itself into FACT360 early last year. It was a great time to start a new business, wasn't it, Paddy? Ready for the start of a pandemic, but there we are. So, you know, the beauty is a lot of my presentation has been done for me because Jeff talked about how it just isn't practical to have thousands of analysts and researchers looking through individual documents. And my favourite example is actually for a law firm based out of the British Virgin Islands. There was one lawyer there, and he spent 4 months manually going through 116,000 emails. You know, he must have looked back on his training and thought that was exactly what he wanted to do when he grew up. But you know, the point is, it just takes an inordinate amount of time. And the issue you have with that is not just the time; it's the fact that you're going to go blind to the things you're looking for, right? I mean, because they just sort of blend into one entity. So if we look at the space we believe we play in, which is this kind of pre-discovery, okay, so this is trying to enable anybody involved in an investigation to get to the data points within the digital communication that will support their case quickly, okay, which flies in the face of law firms extending the length of a case, okay. But the key here is whether you're an internal or external investigation firm is about being able to identify this data set very quickly. So what we're looking to try and achieve here, and one of the reasons, so we're engaged in some discussions with DOJ currently, and one of the things that they have a challenge with is that they just can't take on enough cases. Okay, so they've got this backlog of things, of situations that they're not working on. And so they tend to find themselves in a situation where they settle early. And in their mind, to go add some cynicism to the monetary value of that, that means they're leaving money on the table, right? Because they can't try the cases. And so they look at that and they can't then invest in more lawyers, and they can't do all the things they want to do and running the money back into the DOJ. So this type of early case assessment piece is really about identifying fast and quick the things you need to be able to make a decision on a case, and not having to invest in a product like a Nuix or a Relativity or an open text at this early stage. And the first thing you have to ask yourself is, if you're an investigator, okay, there is a bias instantly introduced because we're human beings, because we believe we know what we want the outcome of an investigation to be, because we're either employed to be on the good side or the bad side. And so we go looking for the things that we think we need to find within a communication set that will support our case. So This question, as old as it is still valid today, because if you don't know what you're looking for, how will you possibly find what you need to support the case? And this is around looking for anomalies and how people communicate with each other. So, a little bit of history. We like this because it's just mainly because Paddy was actually at Bletchley Park a couple of weeks ago. We've got a picture of him there next to Hut 6. And in Hut 6, there was a guy called Gordon Welchman back in World War II. And whilst Alan Turing was cracking the Enigma code, what Gordon Welchman was doing was he was working on a capability called traffic analysis, and he was monitoring the equivalent of a digital communication that was happening between German commanders. So he was monitoring how they used Morse code communications to communicate with each other. Okay? So by doing that, he could identify how frequently they communicated, who spoke to who was on that communication, how many of them there were, what time of day or night it was, and the length of the communication. And from that, he was able to build out a virtual network, if you like, of all of these individual players, how they were connected to each other. And from that, he could build a baseline view of their comms. And so from there, any significant change to that signature behavior would present itself as an anomaly. And then through some additional work, he could then identify if that was a possible attack that would occur on the British mainland. Okay? And that was called traffic analysis. That is still protected by the Official Secret Act, whereas Alan Turing's is not. And we took that capability and that process and that thought process, and we turned that into transactional analytics, which is fundamentally the same thing, but now based upon digital communication. Okay? And that can be any digital communication. As long as there is a sender and a receiver or a broadcast message on any format, we can ingest it into the tool and start to identify the baseline behavior in an organization and identify then signature changes. Okay? So what we do at a high level, because I know this isn't, I can't imagine we're a super technical audience, unfortunately for you, because I'm not either. The key is we take an input from, say, Office 365, we can take Gmail, we can take WhatsApp, we can take Messenger, any form of digital communication. We can take transcribed voice. Okay, so on a case, and I'll give you an example of some work we did with QE, because they were involved a little bit when we were doing some of the development work at the back end of last year. And the key here is once we've ingested this data, we can then produce this network. And what this network is it's temporal. It's based over a number of years worth of data. And we can start to identify how people's prestige, as we call it, or importance within that communications network changes. Now, because the tool works in an unsupervised learning manner, it enables itself to build a baseline of behavior. So it will then start to identify when people's behavior changes subtly. Because the bad actor in any fraud case or corruption case doesn't wake up on Monday morning and go, God, do you know what? I had a really bad weekend. I'm just going to go and rip my company off for a few $1 million. Okay? They don't do that. What happens is their behavior changes over a period of time for whatever the reason may be. Okay, and we have a second version of this tool that's used for wellness that is really used around being able to identify how people feel about the company and how they communicate with each other and how well they are and their well-being and their mental health. Okay, and using similar principles, we can start to identify how people's behavior changes. Okay, so you can identify who the bad actors are. And everything we do is all about alerting you as an investigator into what is known as the unknown. Okay, so the things you don't know you're looking for. Now, an example of that is an organization we did work with. They had spent 4 years with a set of data, and that was probably in the region of 1.2 to 1.3 million communications within the organization formed the corpus of the data. They built a catalogue of 4,000 search criteria or search terms that they were pumping into a traditional e-discovery tool. And they still had not isolated the data set or the communications they required to be able to identify why the key protagonists were who they were and what they were doing and why they were doing it. So they were struggling to find supporting evidence for the case. So the first thing we did for them was we identified this network, we identified all the key players, we identified the anomalous behavior. And interestingly, within probably 2 hours of us finishing processing the data through this AI engine, we found the key protagonists and 3 people that were the 3 main supporting cast in the case. But when we deployed the software and we deployed the data, we knew nothing about the case at all, nothing. Okay, so we didn't know who was involved, what the outcome was that they were looking for, etc., etc. But by virtue of the network alone and monitoring and looking at how people's behavior changed in this post hoc investigation, we were able to identify the key players. And then from there, the next level of the AI starts to drill down into the physical communications themselves, because up to this point, we haven't looked at any of the content of the communications. Okay, so the first layer of this is GDPR compliant. We're not interested in the underlying information that sits inside the communication to produce the network. The second part is where we start to digest and understand the context of the communication. Okay, so this is all around now about our natural language understanding engine. Okay, so the way other tools work is they typically will look at language and they'll take words that they think mean the same thing and they put them in buckets, and then they say off you go, and you can go and kind of search around them, and they give those buckets some crazy name that has no bearing whatsoever on the case that you're working on. So what we're doing with this tool is we take every sentence, every paragraph, every written word, we understand exactly what it means in the context it's meant, and we put it into what we class as tags and topics, which means that you can then start to drill down through that and identify real meaning to the language that supports your case. Now, the beauty of this is twofold. The first thing is it's based upon what is classed as IPTC. Okay, so when you go to the BBC website and you go to news, you click on world news, and then you'll choose the country, and then under the country you'll choose the business, politics or sport, and then you'll find sport, and then to use our constant example, you'll then find football that's been going on in France, and that Messi joined PSG, and so on and so forth. But you could do that. You need to know nothing about that at all. Okay, so it's super easy. It's intuitive, right? If you go to a website and you follow that list, you'll get to the point you want to get to intuitively. So we built this platform so it works in exactly the same way. Okay, and I'll show you some screenshots in a second.
Well, I'll just. It's a quick question. Thank you.
I don't know if I press that button hard enough.
Yeah, no, it's right. How does this work in companies where you have people writing in different alphabets, different languages?
So we translate from 29.
Yeah, plus 100 actually. It's all the Google translation.
Okay, all Google translation. So we can translate everything back into the core language, being English, because that's how the IPTC structure is built.
Thank you.
And obviously bear in mind, we can do this voice transcription as well. Okay, so this is everything I've talked about at the moment is all about a post hoc investigation. Okay, so you know something has happened. Okay, and so for example, we've got some friends in the room from a company called Oculus Financial Investigation who use it. That one there, and that one there. And there's a question, I think, at the... There's a question?
Yes, just a question. So step 1, where you identify the...
Hold on one sec. We need to get you a microphone.